All right, good morning. And this is Bonnie McFarland apologizing for the delay. We logged in a little bit before 10 and we're told we need a password, which we didn't have. So we just sent an email out to folks, so folks will be joining us. But it looks like a number of you either figured it out on your own or were able to get the email. So again, apologies for that technical glitch. So, but welcome and congratulations on getting in. This week we do have some new updates for you regarding the LCAP. As I'm sure you all know, the governor issued an executive order affecting LCAP timelines and reporting requirements last month. And just last night, CDE posted the optional template that may be used for the required report to the community. There are a number of questions that have yet to be answered regarding the requirements, so we're not going to have all the answers to your questions, but we will address the timelines and reporting requirements in the order. As always, our team is here with you today, and you'll be hearing from each of them. And that includes Adrian Balcazar, Evan Bartelheim, Amy Tamamatsu Garcia, Rachel Garcia, and Jeannie Keith. And again, as always, we're here to answer your questions at any time, so please keep the emails and questions coming in. Today's meeting, this week, as I said, we do have some updates for you, and then we'll start with an overview of the executive order. And then we're going to look at the written report to the community and go more in depth on that. We'll look through the process for addressing the written report, and then we'll be sharing some CDE resources to support you in that work. We'll take a look also at the annual budget adoption and the requirements associated with that, given the changes with the LCAP. And then we'll look at moving forward for 2021 LCAP and then the new 3-year LCAP moving forward. And then finally, we'll take a look at some of the considerations for charter schools and single school districts who've looked at using the LCAP as the school plan for student achievement. So that's our agenda for today. Questions, and as usual, we ask that you put your questions in the chat box. And those that we can answer, we'll try to answer today, but we will provide answers to all the questions in a follow-up email with question and answers as we do after each of our meetings. Usually we get that out within the next couple days. You should be receiving that. Please ask us all the questions that you have, and you'll be thinking of things we haven't even thought of as you think about implementation. I'd also like to encourage you to share your challenges that you see as you address the development of the LCAP and meeting these requirements. And these could be challenges that need to be addressed through legislation or through CDE actions. Some of the requirements need legislative action to complete. So we are working with our superintendent, and we share after each meeting, we're asked to share your issues and concerns so she can take those forward and work on those at the policy or legislative level. One of the concerns that we've heard from a number of districts, particularly those of you who've moved forward and with the process, is how to make sure that the new requirements honor the work you've already done and don't require additional effort on your part. We've made that clear to our superintendent and asked her to take that concern forward for you. Also, let us know what you're doing that's working so we can share that with others. All right. Next. So let's begin with a kind of a broad overview of what's in the executive order from the governor. Next slide. Okay, Executive Order N5620 was signed by the governor on April 20th. The order provides an outline of the requirements for reporting to the community regarding the LEA's actions during the period of school closure, the timeline for submission and approval of the 2021 LCAP, the timeline and process for budget approval. It also addresses some additional requirements such as reporting on the local indicator, instructional minutes for physical education, and physical fitness assessments. Next. The message from the governor's office announcing the order stated that the purpose was twofold. First, to empower schools to focus on responding to COVID-19 and to provide transparency to their communities. And that would be accomplished two ways: by extending the deadline for the LCAP and by requiring a written report to their communities explaining how they're responding to the pandemic and how they're continuing to meet the needs of low-income students, English learners, and foster youth. Next. The order extends the deadline for submission of the 2020-21 LCAP from July 1st of this year to December 15th, 2020. And it gives county offices through January 14th of 2021 to approve district LCAPs. It also makes this a one-year LCAP instead of the three-year LCAP that was previously required. Given the delay of the three-year LCAP submission, the order also waives the requirement for LEAs to adopt an LCAP before adopting their budget. The order also requires a written report to the community to be adopted by the local board and submitted to the County Office of Education. For charter schools, this is submitted to the authorizer, and that's required by July 1st of this year. The report must address specific areas, including changes to the instructional program and the impact on students and families, how the LEA is meeting the needs of unduplicated pupils during this time, how they're delivering distance learning, how they're providing school meals, and how they're arranging for supervision during school hours. Okay. Next. Other areas included in the report include instructional minutes and testing requirements for physical education, also addresses local indicator requirements, and it references guidance in a previous order regarding the conduct of public meetings. We'll be going more in depth in each of these later in the presentation. Next slide. This chart provides a summary of the timelines for this year and next for LCAP-related submissions. It also notes the current status of public reporting for the local indicators, and we'll be reviewing each of these later. I'll now turn it over to Jeannie, who's going to guide you through a closer look at the written report to the community.
Thank you, Lonnie. Good morning, everyone. This is Jeannie, and I will share some information this morning about the written report to the community that is required as a condition for the extension of the LCAP submission for the 2021 LCAP. Next slide, please. Paragraph 2 in Executive Order N5620 creates the requirement for LEAs to adopt a written report to the community by July 1. This report explains changes to program offerings and major impacts of closures on students and families in response to the school closures to address COVID-19. The report must detail how the LEA is meeting the needs of unduplicated pupils during the period of school closures, and the steps the LEA has taken to support delivering high-quality distance learning opportunities, providing school meals in non-congregate settings, and arranging for supervision of students during ordinary school hours. Next slide, please. The content of the written report connects to the assurances from the previous Executive Order 2620. The specific requirements for LEAs to explain how they are continuing to deliver high-quality distance learning opportunities, providing school meals, and arranging for supervision of students are outlined in EO 2620. And these, which outlined these three areas as conditions under which California public school districts could retain state funding in the event of a physical school closure. Next slide, please. And now let's look at the adoption of the report to the community. The governing board or body of the LEA adopts the report to the community during the same meeting at which the governing board or body of the LEA adopts the annual budget, which is due July 1, 2020. School districts will then submit their report in conjunction with their submission of the adopted annual budget to the county office. Charter schools will submit their report to their authorizer. And both school districts and charter schools are then required to post a copy of the written report on the homepage of their internet website. Next slide, please. Engagement of stakeholders. Okay. What is required for engaging stakeholders with this report? While the public hearing for the written report is not required, the FAQs from the CDE state that to the extent practicable, LEA should seek stakeholder feedback to inform the development of the written report to the community, consistent with the stakeholder engagement process they use to develop their annual budget. With this in mind, LEAs may consider how they will engage stakeholders in the development of their written report to the community. They may want to consider how engaging stakeholders might support the LEA to fully reflect their outreach and response to the specific needs in their community during school closures in their report. The governing board or body of the LEA must adopt the written report at the same meeting at which the governing board or body of the LEA adopts the budget by July 1. The CDE has recommended that the written report not be a consent item. As a non-consent item, the LEA would provide an opportunity for the information in the report to be described to the community at the board meeting, along with information included in the annual budget. It is important to keep in mind the audience for the report is the community. And now I'm going to turn it over to Amy to talk about the process for addressing the written report.
Yes, thank you, Jeannie. Next, we'll be looking at some considerations for the process of addressing the required descriptions to be contained within the written report to the community as required by Executive Order N5620. Next slide, please. LEAs may soon be planning for a process to address the required descriptions of the written report, and the table to the right contains the areas to be addressed. To the left in the box are some questions that might be used to begin the process of planning and could be applicable to any of the 5 areas. There are 2 broad areas, which are changes to program offerings and the major impacts due to school closures, and how the LEA is meeting the needs of unduplicated student groups. The last 3 areas are specific to the areas that were prioritized in Executive Order N2620 as a condition of receiving state funds during school closure. These prompts are not part of the CDE's template, and they are intended to really be just some ways that you might think about the text that you might be putting together for this report. In the development of your report, you may begin to think about who you will need to involve in the process. The staff who typically prepare the contents of the LCAP, which I assume are many of you on this Zoom call today, may need to engage additional partners in this work. Depending on the anticipated contents that you will include in the written report, there may be different levels of detail needed to complete it. For example, for each of the different areas, distance learning, meals, and child supervision, you would want to think about the partners you would need in terms of completing these sections. When developing the report, how will you address the different programs, various approaches, or the various service models that you've used across the different grade spans or based on student and community needs? How might you describe the types of supports, including differentiated supports that were provided to student groups based on needs? And did your LEA engage in partnerships to serve students and families, whether it be in distance learning, in the provision of meals, or in arranging supervision of students? If you are a charter school, how might you also include the services provided by the charter school, including those that might have been provided in partnership with agencies or with your authorizer? So we can begin to think about certain things that will help us in the process of developing that written report. Next slide. We also want to be sure to share the resources on the CDE website. Next slide. And so this was the big release last night. If you had not yet come across this, the CDE did post their version of the form for the written report to the community. They are calling it the COVID-19 Operations Written Report. It can be found on the CDE website, where you can also typically go to get LCAP information. And what you see here, the written report that they released yesterday, the instructions state that the LEAs shall include sufficient detail yet be sufficiently succinct in a manner that promotes understanding for your community. The word count is a strong encouragement of 300 words or less, but what we would recommend is that your descriptions be written with your community and stakeholders in mind. As stated earlier, the purpose and intent of this report is to describe the changes the LEA made in response to the COVID-19 emergency and school closures. Each LEA agreed to meet certain conditions set forth in Executive Order N2620 in order to retain state funding during school closures, and this written report provides the community with a description of how the LEA met those assurances. This is a screenshot of that CDE's form, which LEAs may use. That's the way the executive order is written, that the CDE shall develop a form that the LEAs may use. Next slide. Other resources. Last Tuesday, CDE presented an update on Executive Order N5620 and the changes to the LCAP process and timeline. So they presented that webinar prior to the form being released yesterday, but the slides are available at, that you can access here at this link. They also prepared an FAQ related to changes, which can be found at the link below in the second bullet. Next slide. We also want to share some CDE resources that, that have web pages within the CDE website for each of the three areas of distance learning, meals, and supervision. So here we have the distance learning page, which provides links and tabs where you can access webinars, resources from CDE, as well as resources shared by other agencies such as county offices and other school districts. You can access these resources, content, and tools for teachers and parents. And the CDE states that they have not extensively reviewed all the resources being shared and says that the individual LEAs are responsible for assessing the appropriateness of any specific resource prior to implementation. So we're really sharing these resources with you that CDE has curated in hopes that perhaps they could potentially support your work in the development of your written report to the community. Next slide. The meal program, which is an essential service being provided by our LEAs. And if it's not typically something that you describe in depth in an LCAP, it's probably going to be an area where you will be engaging with your food services or business services offices to provide a description for that report to the community. The CDE website compiles all the up-to-date waivers and flexibilities, considerations and requirements as related to meal service during this time of social distancing and school closures. So they have a specific link for meal services. Next slide. And this is an area that I have seen in the chat. We're getting a few questions about this. This third specific description area is for LEAs to arrange for supervision of students during ordinary school hours. The Health and Human Services Agency, Labor and Workforce Development Agency, and the California Department of Ed issued joint guidance to explain what LEAs can do to meet Executive Order N2620. This slide is displaying the bulleted list from the guidance, which outlines what LEAs can do. The written report will require LEAs to describe how they arrange for supervision of students during ordinary school hours. And so this would likely include a description of how the district developed a plan, partnered with local agencies, informed parents of options, and served as a resource. So if you take a look at this guidance, and you have the link below at the bottom of the slide, I think some of the questions we are receiving are around, does it mean that the LEA needs to provide the specific childcare, or is it about providing and arranging and notifying families and being a part of that process to inform families of the availability of childcare? And so this guidance would be a helpful starting point for that. We also have included the link to Executive Order N4520's information related to the provision of childcare. If the LEA has ACES programs, the After School Education and Safety Grant, there was additional flexibility granted to allow for childcare of essential critical infrastructure workers to be served in programs using ACES grant funds, including during ordinary school hours. As we know, ACES funds are typically for before and after school. And so there's information posted by CDE at that link at the very bottom as well. And that will conclude my section. Next slide. Adrienne.
Hi, this is Adrienne, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the annual budget adoption that will still need to be taking place by June 1st, 2020. So the public hearing that is needed for this, the requirement to hold the public hearing and to adopt your local annual budget is still due by July 1st, and that requirement for a public hearing has not been waived. That is still in effect. Also, further guidance says that the LEA can hold the annual public hearing at the same time for the same governing meeting that the budget is adopted, or you can host it at a previous board meeting. Also, too, in the requirement that has been waived in the Executive Order N5620, what it does is it decouples the LCAP requirement that's tied to your annual budget adoption. So certain budgetary requirements have been included in this that would waive the adoption of the LCAP prior to adopting your 2021 adopted annual budget. It also waives the inclusion that expenditures that are put into your LCAP are coupled with your LCAP. It also waives the deadlines for the disapproval from the county superintendent of schools, and so it allows that decoupling. Also, it allows the waiving of the requirement of approval of the LCAP before the annual budget can be approved. And again, these were all legal requirements that had the LCAP and the annual budget tied together. So legally, these had to be decoupled. And now, moving forward to the 2021 LCAP.
Thank you. This is Evan Bartelheim. Next slide, please. Sorry. Next slide. Thank you. So having heard that there will be a one-year LCAP submitted by December, you may be wondering what LCAP template and what stakeholder process will be required for the 2020-21 LCAP. And also, will LEA still be required to use the 2019-2020 annual update template? At this time, the template metrics and stakeholder process to be used for the 2020-21 one-year LCAP and the annual update have yet to be determined, and they will need to be detailed in future legislation. The CDE has indicated that they will be consulting with stakeholders and working with the legislature to develop the 2021 one-year LCAP template, as well as the stakeholder process required to develop the LEA's 2021 plan. Next slide. As mentioned earlier, the governor's executive order also addresses the change to the timeline for the approval of the local indicators that were announced earlier this year. So per the executive order, the requirement to review the data that is to be publicly reported for the dashboard local indicators in conjunction with the adoption of the LCAP has been waived, but only with respect to conducting this review at the same board meeting as the LCAP adoption prior to July 1st, 2020. However, state law still requires the CDE to produce a dashboard, which includes the reporting of local indicators. So while the reporting out of the local indicators alongside the LCAP prior to July 1 has been temporarily waived, the requirement to collect and review data and to submit the local indicators for basic services, implementation of academic standards, access to a broad course study, parent and family engagement, and school climate has not been eliminated yet. At this point, the CDE has indicated that although the local indicator reporting requirements remain in Ed Code, there may be legislation in the near future that addresses suspension or changes to the 2020 dashboard, so stay tuned. Next slide. Many of you have been asking, what about the work that we have already done on our 1920 annual update and our 3-year LCAP? Good question. First, we'd like to say, consider the work that you've done so far on the 2023 LCAP and annual update as preparation for both the 1-year plan, the 2021 plan, and the 3-year plan that will be forthcoming. We would expect that many of the actions and services already identified during the LCAP process with stakeholders prior to school closures will still be relevant at some point in the future. Also note that the executive order does not prohibit an LEA from sharing the work that they have completed so far, whether it's the annual update, the new 3-year plan, or both, with their community. It would be a local decision to share these, and LEAs would still be expected to complete the written report to the community, as well as the 1-year plan in December. Also, consider any data. Just a note that the ELCAP system will remain open to serve LEA needs, so consider that kind of a repository for the time being that you can be able to access at any point. Additionally, any data that you've collected so far to inform the local indicators still has value in informing LEA needs and should be maintained both to meet the fall 2020 dashboard requirements until we hear differently, as well as to aid the development of the written report and the 1-year plan in December. Next slide. And finally, the new 3-year LCAP, which will start in the 21-22 school year. Next slide. So finally, as noted in the executive order, the 3-year plan cycle is scheduled to begin with the first year plan year of 2021-22. This 3-year plan will be due on June 30th, 2021, and the 3-year cycle will include the 21-22, 22-23, and 23-24 school years. This 3-year plan will utilize the LCAP template that was approved earlier this year in January by the state board, and that is the template upon which our ELCAP system and the CDE's e-template, as well as I think doc tracking, have been designed. So that is all we know so far about the plans moving forward, and we're moving on to Rachel.
Hello, everyone. In this section, we'll be taking a look at some considerations for using the LCAP as the school plan for charters and single school districts. Next slide, please. Per Ed Code 64001J, single school districts and charter schools may use the LCAP to serve as the SIPSA as long as certain requirements are met. Executive Order N5620 does not waive or change this statute. Therefore, charters and single school districts may still use the LCAP as its SIPSA. It's also important to note that the written report to the community is not an LCAP. Therefore, charter schools must complete the written report by July 1st, 2020, as well as the 2020-21 1-year LCAP due December 15th. If a charter school or single school district chooses to keep the LCAP and the SIPSA as separate plans, then the SIPSA will need to meet both state and federal school planning requirements, such as development and approval of the plan by the school site council. Next slide, please. The template that an LEA chooses to use for its SIPSA is a local decision. At this time, we do not know if the template for the 2020-21 LCAP that is due by December 15th will meet federal school planning requirements. If the template does not meet federal school planning requirements and a charter school or single school district chooses to use the LCAP as the SIPSA, It will be up to the school to ensure that all federal school planning requirements are incorporated into the template. Next slide, please. This chart highlights some considerations for charter schools and single school districts when deciding whether or not to use the LCAP as its SIPSA. Options 1 and 2 both involve keeping the LCAP and the SIPSA as separate plans. If a charter school or single school district decides to keep the plans separate, then the school would develop their SIPSA based on their local timeline, in addition to the 2020-21 LCAP that is due by December 15th. Now with the first option, I'm sorry, back to the previous slide. With option 1, the scenario is that the charter school or single school district could use the 2020-23 LCAP template as the SIPSA. We know that a number of charter schools had already planned on keeping, using the LCAP as the SIPSA and had started this work already. And so you can continue to use that template as your school plan, but some considerations to note would be that now if you're keeping the plans separate, the SIPSA must be developed and approved by the school site council. So you may need to reconvene your school site council. The school plan must also meet state and federal school plan requirements. There's a requirement for the comprehensive needs assessment, and this could be in the identified needs section of that template. Now, if you're using this as your school plan only, then for this template, you would not need to complete all sections of the template. So any sections of the template that are applicable to the LCAP would not need to be completed. Option 2 involves using a locally developed SIPSA template for your school plan. And so again, it would need to be developed and approved by the school site council. And your template does not need CDE approval because again, the school plan template is a local decision. And so the school plan must also meet state and federal school plan requirements. Now the third option involves using the LCAP as the SIPSA. And so you would use the LCAP template that is due by December 15th. And again, we don't know what that template is going to look like. And so you would use that to serve as your LCAP and to serve as your school plan. In this scenario, the school site council is not required because you would need to adhere to the LCAP stakeholder requirements for the advisory committees. And so it's important to note that, again, we don't know what this template is going to look like, and it may not meet federal school plan requirements. And so in that case, the school would need to incorporate these requirements into the template. Next slide, please. Here are the links to our upcoming Zoom meetings. We have a state and federal program Zoom meeting scheduled for Tuesday, May 12th at 1 p.m. And our next LCAP Zoom meeting is Tuesday, May 19th at 10 a.m. Next slide. And so I will now turn it over to Bonnie.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you all for joining us. And we apologize again for the glitch with the password, but I'm glad you all made it. If you did join us late, the presentation will be posted and has been recorded, and you can access that on our LCAP website. We noted we'll be following up with questions and answers to your questions. You should receive that via email in the next couple of days. I did see some questions about the written report and requirements and the templates and can you use other formats. I think those were answered, but just to reiterate, there is no requirement to use the state template. So if you have something, there is a requirement to address all the questions. So if you have that in another format and that works for you, that's great. We will leave the chat open for a little while longer so you can think through and add any questions that you might have that we can respond to. And we will look forward to talking with you again in a couple weeks and hopefully have some more details and more in-depth answers to your questions. thanks so much and appreciate all that you're doing to keep things going during this time. And you contact if you have any questions in between our meetings. Thank you.